how data, money, and repression are turning the world upside down, and how we can fight back. So guys, we have an actual fascist in the White House. This shit's fucked up, right? And I don't know about you guys, but it's been over a year and a half, and I still wake up most mornings faintly hoping that it was all some really weird, trippy nightmare. But then I look at my phone and I'm like, oh, right. But even then, it still seems too crazy to be true. Like, this is a thing that happened yesterday. The president's lawyer secretly taped him discussing a payment to a Playboy model. And that's before the Justice Department released the Carter Page FISA warrant application yesterday. And if you guys need some more evidence that things are deeply, deeply messed up, you might want to give Amy Siskin's weekly list of things that are subtly changing around you, and many of them subtly, about as subtle as a ton of bricks. But they're coming so fast that we barely have time to process one thing before the next one happens. Anyway, I invite you to ask yourselves, when did you first realize we'd slipped into an alternate timeline? This was mine. I'm an optimist by nature, and I really, really held on to the belief that Trump couldn't possibly win for as long as I could. But when the Cubs won the World Series, even I had to admit that the world no longer worked the way I thought it did. It gets much worse than baseball, of course. So here are just a few examples of scary things that have happened recently. Palantir, secretly using New Orleans to test a predictive policing technology without the knowledge of the city council. MoviePass CEO bragging like this is a good thing about how his app tracks your location before and after movies. This is from a local Fox affiliate in Memphis. I'm sure you've all heard of this, about those Amazon Alexa machines recording a private conversation that a couple was having about hardwood floors, sending it to a random contact who was one of the two people's coworker. And Amazon was just kind of like, oh yeah, that's a bug. We should probably work on that. No biggie. Alexa again. Marriott, going to start putting them in hotel rooms. You comfortable with that? Yeah, me neither. Venmo. People use Venmo here? I know a lot of people do. I'm resisting very strongly. I like my checkbook. I like cash. Nevertheless, really, really weird stuff about how if you do use it, the default setting is that all your friends can see who you're sending money to and what that's for. Like, why? Like, I don't understand why people, like, who wants that? Seriously. And that's before you get into how all that data is used in the back end to create a social net, to develop the network map of who hangs out with who sends who money, in what ways, what all those relationships are. Like, this is data that is really revealing at an individual level, but it is massively revealing, almost unimaginably so, at a mass level. Here's another one. Anyone from California? Yeah, so digital license plates rolling out. Some of you may have caught the talk earlier today that went into a little bit of license plates and how they can be used to track, where people are up to the minute. California's looking at some even weirder stuff, that up to and including having ads play on your rear license plate to target the person who's sitting behind you on the 5. Like traffic's not bad enough, right? Facebook, our favorite people, giving device makers deep access to data on their users and on their users' friends. All of this stuff. For those of you who are here for the previous hour, my friend and colleague Laura Reed was talking about how Ranking Digital Rights is pushing tech companies to be more forthcoming about the kinds of data that they collect on users and on non-users, for that matter, and what they do with that. This is not something that they ever disclosed before journalists start digging. And it's not just the tech companies. The telcos and companies in all kinds of other industries are getting into it too. So AT&T and Verizon are really, really horny to start running massive ad tracking networks to rival Facebook. And this is something that the AT&T CEO, Randall Stevenson, said at the Code Conference not long ago. AT&T has an amazing amount of data, customer data for 40 million pay TV subscribers in North and South America, 130 million mobile subscribers, 16 million broadband subscribers. We have really great customer insight on what kind of shows and media content they're viewing, where they are, all kinds of information on the consumer. Can you pair a very formidable ad inventory with a very formidable amount of data and information on the customer, viewership data, and all kinds of other information? And can you create something unique just from a straight advertising platform and change how you're monetizing content? This guy's excited about this. I'm not. And this is before we even get into the super, super scary stuff that's going on in China, for example, which is something that Jairus Khan talked about on Friday during his talk on the Internet Health Report. If you didn't catch that talk, I really recommend you look it up when the videos go live in the coming weeks. So there's a thread that ties all of these different things together, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. All of these headlines, all of these data points, and many, many more are evidence that we here in the US and globally are slipping into something that I call, and that other people are calling, networked authoritarianism. So what is that? As Bernie mentioned, I'm a newly recovering academic, so bear with me here. So networked authoritarianism is a term coined by Rebecca McKinnon, who you may know from the book Consent of the Networked, from Global Voices, Ranking Digital Rights, and a bunch of other really cool projects. And her article, which came out in 2011, focused on China in the Chinese context, but the phenomenon is much, much bigger than that. So networked authoritarianism involves a single ruling party remaining in control while a wide range of conversations about the country's problems still occur on websites and social networking services. The government follows this online chatter, and sometimes people are even able to use the internet to call attention to problems or injustices, and even manage to have an impact on policy. As a result, the average person has a much greater sense of freedom and may feel that he or she has the ability to speak and be heard in ways that were not possible under classic authoritarianism. At the same time, in the networked authoritarian state, there's no guarantee of individual rights and freedoms. Those whom the rulers see as threats are jailed. Truly competitive, free, and fair elections are not held, and the courts and the legal system are tools of the ruling party. Sound familiar to anyone? A couple of years ago, I started a study on networked authoritarianism in Russia, and I had to change my study pretty quickly when the 2016 election hit. And so I focused my study on how the theory of networked authoritarianism helps explain Russian foreign policy under Vladimir Putin, and specifically the extraordinary influence operations that started in Eastern Europe and gradually extended to Western Europe, the UK, and of course the United States. I won't go into the full article here. It's open access. You can find it online pretty easily, or you can scroll up and down my Twitter feed. I am pretty good at self-promotion, shamelessly. But the TLDR is that Russian political elites, from Putin on down, see information not as a human right, but as a threat to their kleptocratic hold on power. The color revolutions of earlier in this century, the Arab Spring, and the mass protests in Russia around 2011, 2012 in particular really freaked out the Kremlin. So they started to crack down on the internet, using some of the same tactics that they used to control broadcasting and print media, as well as some new tactics that we'll talk about. At the same time, countries in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union that Russia traditionally sees as part of its rightful sphere of influence were moving closer to the US and to the EU, both economically and in terms of values and politics. So Russia started launching cyber attacks. The Estonia one is perhaps the most well-known earliest example, as well as interfering in public discourse and elections to stop this trend. It worked so well, look at Hungary and Poland, for example, that they set an even higher goal, dismantling the current world order by taking aim at the EU and the US. And here we are. And it's not just Russia, far from it. Just this week, the Oxford Internet Institute released an empirical fact-based study documenting the spread of computational propaganda around the world. So if you look at, you probably can't see this too well, and I can't either because I need new glasses. No, it's not that. It's just my poor eyesight, but thank you for your concern. Oh. Oh, you can't see. So if, sorry, don't worry about me, but if they can't see because of the lights. Anyway, so they found evidence that this year in 48 different countries, up from 28 the previous year, at least one political party or government agency was using social media to manipulate public opinion domestically. Most of this growth came from countries where political parties were spreading disinformation during elections, or in countries where government agencies feel threatened by junk news and foreign interference and are responding by developing their own computational propaganda campaigns in response. In a fifth of these countries, the researchers found evidence of disinformation campaigns operating over chat applications like WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat. Computational propaganda is increasingly using paid advertisements and search engine optimization on a wide array of internet platforms. And this is a really big business. Since 2010, political parties and governments have spent more than $500 million on the research, development, and implementation of psyops and public opinion manipulation over social media. In a few countries, this includes efforts to counter extremism, but in most countries, this involves the spread of junk news and misinformation during elections, military crises, and complex humanitarian operations. So how did we get here exactly? So let's go back in time to the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And because I'm a recovering academic and I feel the need to compulsively add citations to everything, I'm dealing with that by having screenshots of articles that I read. So that's, my name's Natalie, I'm a recovering academic. Thanks, guys. So if you remember the late 80s and early 90s, which frankly I don't, but I've read a lot about it, there were a lot of people who were really optimistic that with the fall of the Soviet Union and a wave of democratization across not only the former Soviet Union, but also parts of Africa, parts of Latin America, various places all over the world, that we were arriving at this end of history, right? Thanks, Jared, right there. That electoral democracy and liberal humanist values and free market economics had won the day, and that history was going to keep marching in this direction towards greater serendipity and happiness and wonderfulness for everyone. So that didn't really work out, obviously. But at the same time, a lot of people were thinking about it in terms of convergence rather than one socio-political economic system winning over another, that the old communism and the old capitalism of the 20th century were going to converge into something that would kind of look like Sweden or the other Nordic havens that are not quite nearly as perfect as we like to think that they are, but they're a fun, it's a nice utopia that we have in mind about, like, the Sweden inside my head, right? As opposed to the real Sweden. But of course, that's not really what happened. What actually happened is that the international community is now facing and this article that I'm quoting from was written in 2015. So this was before before hardly anyone was taking Trump seriously as a political force. That instead of the best of all possible worlds, the international community was dealing with an unholy trinity of authoritarian politics, cutthroat economics, and Big Brother surveillance. Even though we might all be eating off IKEA tableware, listening to Spotify, and reading the latest Girl with the Dragon Tattoo knockoff, we are not living in a giant Sweden. Our world is converging in a far more dystopian way. After 2 successive conservative governments and with a surging far-right party pounding its anti-immigrant drumbeat, even Sweden seems to be heading in the same dismal direction. The US has been slouching toward illiberalism for some time now, and the authors worried at the time that while America had not yet descended into despotism, the convergence was hardly complete, and we might only be one right-wing populist leader away from that worst-case scenario. The call is coming from inside the White House. So how do data and money play into this? There's the Citizens United decision and partisan gerrymandering, of course, which give the Republican Party a structural advantage, and that's very, very important. But I'm here to talk about the role of technology and specifically of data flows. Back to nerd story time. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the phrase liberation technology, but I bet a somewhat smaller number of you have read Larry Diamond's article about liberation technology. And there's a lot of good reasons to critique the phrase, but I do think that the article has some really important lessons for us there. In large part because the article, contrary to what some people think when they hear liberation technology, did not say that technology was inherently liberatory. Quite to the contrary. It said that while, at that time, so in 2010, while information communication technology, and in particular the internet and social media, were being used for a number of positive, pro-social, pro-democratic, pro-human rights, pro-good stuff ways, that this was far from the only means the only impact that technology could have on human societies. And it also pointed out, very importantly, that it's not like the internet is the first technology to have altered human societies in such a way. In the 15th century, the printing press dramatically changed the accumulation and dissemination of information, which led to the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, etc. And on these foundations, modern democracy emerged. But the printing press also facilitated the rise of the centralized state and prompted the movement toward censorship. Similarly, a century and a half ago, the telegraph was supposed to promote peace and understanding. The news traveled faster than ever before. This led to the very first intergovernmental and international bodies to regulate the flow of information and to make sure that technologies could talk to each other, that when your telegram actually didn't need to be printed out at the French border, copied onto paper, walked over to Germany, and then retyped back into Morse code. But what followed, in spite of the telegraph, in spite of radio, was not peace and freedom, but the bloodiest century in human history. And so what Diamond wrote was that today's enthusiasts of liberation technology could be accused of committing the analytic sins of their Victorian forebearers, technological utopianism, and chronocentricity. That is, the egotism that one's own generation is poised on the very cusp of history. Thank you. So moving on to later in the article, which it is a good read, I do recommend it, that mobilizing against authoritarian rule only represents one possible liberating use of digital ICTs. These tools can also help to widen the public sphere, create a more pluralistic and autonomous arena of news, commentary, and information. They can be powerful instruments for transparency and accountability, documenting and deterring abuses of human rights and of democratic procedures. They can also liberate people from poverty and ill health. They can convey timely information about all sorts of things, prices, help with microfinance, map epidemic outbreaks, et cetera, et cetera. Computers can be good, right? Yeah, so about that. So the thing with the thing with those first few years of the 21st century is that regular people like us figured out how to use computers and how to make the most of them a lot faster than governments and companies did, for the most part, especially than governments did. But they caught on pretty quickly. And they developed these different tactics for controlling the flow of information, something that scholars call information controls. And Ron Diebert and the other scholars who worked with him on the OpenNet initiative conceptualize these in terms of generations. And they're not generations in the sense that they go boom, 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 one after another with a discrete beginning and end. Although that's not how human generations work either, is it? It's more about they appeared in a certain order, and different countries can combine tactics from different generations. They can leapfrog, they can move around. It's maybe not the best analytical tool, but it's one that works for me at least. So we start with access restrictions and DNS blocking, things like the Great Wall of China, relatively crude technical blocking. That was relatively easy to circumvent, and I'm willing to bet that there are people in this room who've worked on some of these earliest censorship circumvention tools, or perhaps work on some of the more recent ones. Before long, we moved on to just-in-time blocking and to internet shutdowns, where around specific protests, specific political events, governments would just either put in filters or types of content blocking, or just flat out pull the plug on the internet around these specific events where they feared that people would use the internet and social media to communicate, to mobilize, and basically get in their way. More recently, we saw a turn to disinformation and propaganda, as well as what some people have called the re-territorialization of internet governance. So using the ISTAR organizations and the various mechanisms of global internet governance to enshrine authoritarian principles in the way the global internet itself works. So for example, if you remember the ICANN transition, or thank you. The IANA transition, when the U.S. government essentially gave I'm simplifying vastly, but essentially gave ICANN to the international community. There were a lot of countries who wanted the governance of ICANN and of IANA in particular to be based on nation states and to be based on the one country, one vote principle, rather than having companies and civil society and individual peoples and people in the technical community as well being involved. And the problem with that, of course, is that well, first of all, I don't think IANA would work very well without the technical community. But second, and most importantly, there are more countries in the UN that are opposed to freedom of expression and to privacy and to human rights online and in the real world than not. And so fortunately, that was blocked. But that's the kind of conflict that I'm talking about here. And more recently, we have the really rapid explosion of attention hacking, which is something that we've been talking about kind of throughout this conference, of flooding the public sphere with junk information and misleading content and just bullshit, really, to make it harder for people to pay attention to the news that actually matters and to tell what's true, to tell the difference between truth and lies. So now we get to surveillance capitalism, which is a really essential part of networked authoritarianism. So as I think of networked authoritarianism, it's the information controls that are kind of an evolution from classic authoritarianism plus surveillance capitalism, which is what we're living with here in the West, and specifically in the US. So surveillance capitalism, of course, is the business model for the internet, and it's how we get quote unquote free content and services, but it's also an infrastructure for total social control. I think folks here at Hope are going to know a lot already about how this corporate surveillance feeds into government surveillance. Since 2013, we've known about PRISM, we've known about Upstream, we also know about companies like Geophidia, or whatever it calls itself these days, that grab social media data and sell it to law enforcement agencies. And of course, governments can and do use legal processes as well as extra-legal processes to demand information related to specific individuals. I fundamentally believe that surveillance capitalism is incompatible with the human right to privacy and with civil liberties. Thank you. It feels good to not be alone. Moreover, and this part is really important, algorithms don't treat people fairly. There's been some really amazing work recently, including these two books here by Sophia Noble and Virginia Eubanks, that explain the differential impact that technology has on people depending on their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their immigration status, and how wealthy or how poor they are. And now, since Trump and since Brexit in particular, we're starting to understand how surveillance capitalism also enables media manipulation. Media manipulation is not new, far from it, but big data analytics and targeted advertising allow for surgical precision at a massive scale. It's becoming clearer and clearer to me that surveillance capitalism is a direct threat to free expression, to access to information, and to democracy itself. So the stakes are high, guys. They're really fucking high. And this is what I think about all day. This is what keeps me up late at night. This is what gives me anxiety. It's 3 minutes to midnight, all the alarms are going off, and it's time for an all-out fight. So what can we do about it? Well, there's a lot of different things we can do, starting with legislation and regulation, whether that's at the city level, the state or provincial level, The national level, this headline is read in reference to the proposed Honest Ads Act, which would impose the same kinds of transparency and reporting obligations on online political ads as are the case for radio and TV broadcasting ads, as well as and print ads, for that matter. At the supranational level, like the GDPR, I think it's too early to tell exactly how the GDPR is going to play out. If it's going to be 4 letters to save us all. Probably not. That's placing too much hope in anything. But I do think it's a big deal. You know, if you look at the fact that that Facebook, for example, moved the data from everyone it possibly could from its Ireland data centers to its U.S. data centers in order to in order to be able to continue targeting and collecting and using data of as many users as they could get away with. But you know what? They don't have a mechanism for somebody to assert that, hey, I'm an EU citizen, I'm in the US, please treat my data in Ireland. You know, if anybody knows of such a mechanism, please let me know. But I'm just waiting for a really good class action lawsuit to join. Looks like I'll have some buddies on that one. So another tactic we can use, and that was the subject of the previous talk, which if you missed, you should look up when the video comes out, is corporate social responsibility. Companies we're going to need to use the power of the law to force companies to do the right thing, but we still need to ask them to do the right thing and to pressure them to voluntarily improve their practices related to privacy, free expression, and other human rights. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights are very clear about this. Companies have a duty to respect human rights. States, of course, have the primary obligation to protect human rights, and both states and companies have a duty to provide meaningful remedy to, basically a Pottery Barn rule. You fix it, you break it. But companies do have a responsibility to protect human rights, and anyone who tells you that it's not Google or Facebook or Lyft or Uber or Amazon's responsibility to do the right thing is full of shit. It is. So I wanted to point to the great example of ranking digital rights and its corporate accountability index as one mechanism to push companies to do the right thing, and that was the subject matter of the previous talk. But also, tech employee efforts to pressure their leadership to reject contracts with ICE, for example, to step back from facial recognition projects and other dystopian horrors like that are super, super important. And so if you work for a tech company, especially a big one of the most powerful things you can do is to speak up at work and put pressure on your leadership to do the right thing. And if you're in a position to do so, we all have, responsibilities to, feed ourselves, feed our families, take care of our loved ones. And, I don't begrudge anyone having a job that they can live on. If your job if your job or the job of someone is developing Alexa skills, for example, consider getting a different one. You don't have to work on things that are immoral. Another big part of the solution is media reform. Media reform is more than just the internet, guys. And my friend Victor Picard from the University of Pennsylvania has been doing some really tremendously important work on reforming the American media ecosystem. This is not a full list, but some of his recommendations include restoring net neutrality, restoring the fairness doctrine, which until a few decades ago required broadcasters to actually present actually fair and balanced news. Imagine that, right? We need to break up monopolies, whether these are horizontal monopolies, but also we need to think about legislation to break up the vertical integration of these media companies, right? They just have too much power. And they have too much power, and they're motivated. The system is structured so that their primary responsibility is to deliver cash to their shareholders, not to educate, not to inform, not even necessarily to entertain, but just to keep us watching ads so that they can make a lot of money. And that needs to stop. We also need reform to diversify ownership of media. Have you guys been following Sinclair's attempt to buy up everything? Yeah, I'm dimly seeing a lot of fainting, or a lot of no. That was a Freudian slip. I'm dimly seeing a lot of nodding. So it does look like the FCC is going to block some of Sinclair's latest tricks, but the fight's not over, guys. They're going to keep going at it, and they're going to keep making journalists read completely awful Orwellian statements on air about the glory of the Republican Party or like whatever bullshit they come up with that week. We need to fund public service media. We need to support independent journalism. Like, there's all these things that go into it, and this is the result of decades-long campaigns from all sides, but primarily from corporate America, frankly, to diminish the role and the power of independent journalism, of public interest media, and of anything that is not profit, really. So in the same way that we all share part of the responsibility for environmental damage and climate change, I think we're all responsible for fighting surveillance capitalism and its natural consequence, networked authoritarianism. So I would invite you to challenge yourself to not participate in surveillance capitalism if you don't have to. And here again, I think conservation efforts are a really useful analogy, because none of us here have a zero carbon footprint. I certainly don't. But we still have a responsibility to do our best, even if we can't be perfect. So think of it in terms of harm reduction. There's no way that we're all going to be able to completely divest ourselves from Google, from Facebook, from ride-sharing apps, from online ad tracking, from all of these things that are coming together to contribute to this nightmare that we're all in together. Purity is impossible, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a little bit better. So here are some of my least favorite consumer products and services that I would invite you to maybe not throw into the sea, because that's bad for the ocean, but to at least destroy with a hammer or just abstain from. Home speakers. Why? Like, I don't see the point of them. Like, laziness and like the novelty aspect of it, but none of it is worth the mass surveillance that we're inviting into our homes and the normalization of always on, everywhere mass surveillance. Nothing is worth it. And I'm gonna give you a little piece of homework, because again, I'm a recovering academic. Talk to your friends and family about not having home speakers. Another consumer service that I'm really hating these days is MoviePass. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, because I don't think shaming people is really the point. But MoviePass is just a data suck. That's all it is. They don't really have a business model. They keep making contradictory statements about what it's going to be. But it's all predicated on VC's belief that if you can just suck up enough data about consumer behavior, you're going to be able to make money off of it someday. And that's wrong, and that's exactly the problem that I'm talking about. So if you have MoviePass, consider getting rid of it, please. Something else I hate is Venmo, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. In addition to the fact that it's connected to Peter Thiel, who's an absolute monster. I'm assuming you're booing him. What? Yep, I have no doubt that that's the case. Fuck that guy, that's right. Fuck Peter Thiel. So, get back to cash. I'm actually planning to and this is my first time making this commitment in public. I'm going to do an all-cash experiment for a month. I haven't figured out which month yet, but I'm going to try to, other than, my rent and my utilities, to use only cash for a month. I'm promising to write, when I do it, I promise to write about it and let you know how it goes. Finally, Ring. That's Amazon's home security system. That shit's a fucking nightmare, guys. Like, you may have seen the stories in the New York Times and a few other places recently about how Internet of Things, connected home devices are being used by domestic abusers to control and gaslight and harass their victims. That's just the tip of the iceberg. These things are just bad. Like, don't do that. Like, you know, like having a home alarm system is one thing, but you do not need a camera at your front door. You do not need a camera in your living room. You definitely don't need a camera in your bathroom. Just say no, guys. In closing, before we move on to questions, I want to leave you with this quote from Ursula K. Le Guin. "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any power can be resisted and changed by human beings." And the operative term here is human beings. Computers alone will not save us. Technological solutionism is what got us into this mess, and it's only going to drag us deeper into it. If you listen to Facebook's talking points, for example, Zuckerberg is basically claiming that the solution to the problems caused by Facebook is more Facebook, and that's nonsense. More recommended reading. There's both by my colleague Siva Vaidyanathan from the University of Virginia. There's a New Yorker piece, and if you're interested in more, his book is really, really good. So thank you, guys, and I look forward to your questions. I think we know the drill by now. Go up to the mic. Keep in mind I can't really see you. Just go ahead.
Hey, Natalie, this talk was fucking awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
So your advice about talking to people about their IoT in their home, I think is really, really good. My experience is that people are really defensive. And so my question is, let's say you go to your friend's house and they're having people over, and you see an Alexa in the corner, and it's on, and maybe it's like speaking at people or whatever. What do you do?
So I've been dealing with that a lot. I have several close friends who have Alexas in their homes, and they're awkward conversations because they're your friends and you love them, and you don't want to have an you don't want to clash with them like that, and you're not there to talk about work if this is if like me this is like work. I like to start by asking questions. So, when did you get this? Why did you get this? What do you find helpful about it? Did you hear that? Have you heard these news stories about insert latest Alexa kerfuffle? What do you think? Have you had anything like that happen to you? And then you can just say, I don't like them. I'm not comfortable with them. And then, you can see how the conversation goes, and I doubt one conversation is going to do the trick. Certainly hasn't for me yet, for, the people in my life who have them. But I hope that they're listening. And, I think also talking about it in terms of, a duty to our social environment. It's not just about you and your data. It's about what this is doing to all of us and how this is all taking us down this really, really dark path. But I also wouldn't rule out, and that's a very individual decision, and I'm not quite there yet, though I may get there, is to start letting people know that you're not comfortable being in rooms where there's an Alexa present.
Hi, I actually, I can tell you from experience, though Alexas give us all a very visceral and emotional reaction, telling people, like, what the hell is wrong with you? You're an idiot if you have this. That doesn't work all that well.
Totally.
Personal experience.
Though I did tell my partner before the holidays that if anybody gave us one, I was destroying it with a hammer and putting the video on YouTube.
So I'm curious about something. Let me tell you a story. So I recently worked on a project that is involved in getting smartphones and tablets into every hospital in New York City, in the hands of patients, in the hands of caregivers, doctors, everyone. And I don't know if I should feel like a bad person about this, because this is a way that technology is now becoming an integral part of all the data that is ever going to be generated about you in a hospital. On the other hand, like, the thing that spurred this and got all these grant money on board was that all the research indicating improved patient outcomes from having better data. Where do you draw the line when you're talking about those kinds of, really big scope, data revolution projects?
That's a really big question, and not one that we're going to answer satisfactorily today, unfortunately. But I think asking questions rather than just, on the one hand, we're all super busy during the workday, and when some new policy gets rolled out, most people are just like, at least that's how I usually am a lot of time, like, how is this going to impact my day-to-day? Okay, I'm going to have to change how I do this thing, or I'll have to go to this training, but okay, let's just do what I need to do and then move on to do the stuff that I care about. Ask questions. Say, like, why is this particular aspect important? Or, okay, so what kind of encryption are we using on these systems? And it's likely the first person you ask isn't going to know. They may not even understand the question. But it's important to ask these questions and push back. And another one that's really important in the healthcare context, I think, is what do we do if we get hacked? What do we do if we get ransomware? There have been some really, really scary real-life cases recently, as well as a absolutely edge of your seat episode of Grey's Anatomy last season. No, but I'm kind of joking, but I'm also kind of not. TV portrayals of or other fictional portrayals of the kinds of concerns we're talking about can be a really powerful way to get across to people who haven't really thought about that before. Think about how useful Black Mirror has been in terms of providing us with a language to talk about some of this stuff.
Thank you.
Can you get in line? Happy to talk afterwards, but we need to follow the process. Thanks.
So you mentioned the fairness doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty much a policy that required us broadcasters to present multiple sides of matters that are of importance to the public, right?
That's right.
And one of my concerns with this policy actually is that it kind of lends itself to the attention hacking techniques that you've mentioned before, where people can manufacture and then try to teach a controversy on issues to distract people from other issues or to make it difficult to actually pass these sorts of, get the correct sides of issues in front of the public.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas on how we can avoid making these tools things that will lend themselves to the people we're trying to thwart in the first place?
Sure. So I think this really speaks to the importance of professional, experienced, well-paid journalists and editors. It's the role of a journalist and an editor to figure out what is a valid viewpoint, what is a real viewpoint versus something that, as you say, is just made up to distract the conversation. Unfortunately, journalists and editors and others in the news profession don't get paid nearly enough to make a living. I'm sure we all know lots of people who started out in journalism and now work in PR because that's how you pay bills, right? And so I think that's where, funding journalism and making sure that we have enough journalists and editors that they can do a thorough job at vetting exactly these sort of things is super, super important.
Thank you.
I guess I'll start with an anecdote. Some guy I know who was in Oaxaca in the 2000s, who sees himself as a pretty anti-surveillance guy, posted an ad I saw a couple weeks ago, looking for a housemaid, and it said, "We have a Google Nest thermostat, so you can control your temperature from your smartphone." So my response was pretty sharp to that. But I keep hearing talks like this, talks that say, try to do without this surveillance technology, and oh no, we're not going to try to make you do without that one, because nobody could do without that one, and well, why on earth would you do without this one? And we all have to have different views about which ones you can't live without, which ones there's no point in using. But it's clear we don't have a consensus about that. So a little perspective that this is a battle. Getting rid of these things is a battle to be fought on many fronts, and maybe there should be some kind of, this sounds ridiculous, but some kind of social media site where people talk about which ones they're getting rid of, why it's important to get rid of these things, how it's possible to get rid of them, and just help get support from others in doing this, because the support could help. So I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe somebody can create that social media site. Yeah, and one other thing, since you mentioned independent media, please pay money to your, so the media is good. If you're not paying money to an independent media person, you're going to get shitty media. So look for independent media, hold fundraisers for them, send them story tips, write articles for them, send them photos. It really helps. Thanks.
Great, thank you. It's okay, guys. I did not make the disclaimer that words had to finish with a question, so these were all really good points.
Hey, great talk. So one of the paradoxes is the more
Or move closer to the mic. It's a little short for you.
One of the paradoxes of an open community is the more vulnerable it is to bad actors and attention hijacking. We've kind of seen that here, where a very small number of people have managed to hijack the online conversation. So what are some defenses against that for a community or a society who are still balancing free speech?
Sure. Well, so that's a question that is, it's almost an eternal one, right? And I have a point of view on it, and you asked me for my point of view, so that's the one that I'm going to share. I don't think that the free speech rights of Nazis are more important than everybody else's right to exist. Let me rephrase that as a positive statement. I do believe that the rights of people, and specifically of women, of trans and gender nonconforming people, of people of color, of people with disabilities, of people who are marginalized in any way, shape, or form, their right to participate and be safe is more important than anyone's right to be a vocal fascist. That's not a prescription for government censorship, however. That's a frequent confusion about what the First Amendment actually means. The First Amendment is about government banning speech. That's a separate question. I'm talking about private spaces, which includes the Hope Conference, where there's a policy for who can be admitted and who cannot. It's called a wristband. There's a process for who gets to speak and who doesn't, and who gets a platform with a mic and who doesn't, and so on and so forth. And there is absolutely no reason that in a context like that organizers can't make decisions about what is and is not allowed. And a code of conduct is a really great place to start. But you also need enforcement mechanisms, and in my experience, attending and helping organize a number of conferences in both tech and human rights spaces, you have to think through specific scenarios and kind of game out ahead of time what could happen and how you're going to deal with this and how you're going to communicate about it and about your response to the community. And there's always room for improvement, and I think there's a lot to learn from everything that went down here this weekend. And I hope that's a conversation that we'll be continuing to have in a thoughtful way in the weeks ahead.
Again, you mentioned how some of these services that people use are indispensable or otherwise, difficult to replace. As an example, in British Columbia, for example, ride-hailing is illegal. You cannot get an Uber or a Lyft there. Now, there are efforts to change this legislatively, which I'm working against. Now, I'm wondering, with the obvious caveat that entrenched interests gonna entrench, are legislative options, political options, viable against some of these more egregious abuses of information?
Not only are they viable, they're absolutely necessary. Politics is how you organize people together to agree on the rules for a common society. It's become a dirty word. It doesn't have to be a dirty word. Participating in the political process is how we get out of this.
Hey, I loved your talk, and I'm happy that you chose to pick on MoviePass because, one, I'm a MoviePass subscriber. I'm sure some people in this room might be. And it's one of those things that, like, if I describe it, I run the risk of, like, advertising for it. It sounds too good to be true, like a lot of these things. Personally, I don't care about Facebook, but MoviePass, it's so cheap, that could be my entire entertainment budget. And I think for a lot of people, especially people who might not make a lot of money, it's like, how do you give that up? And I think, like a lot of these services, it might take advantage of people who don't have the resources to spend the full price of a movie ticket. I just wonder, like, how do we address that? How can we convince people that these things are evil and maybe they shouldn't use them when it's too good to be true? Like, how do we address
That's a really great question. And the question of inequality vis-a-vis privacy is a super important one. I'm getting a note that the time's almost up. But so if you look at smartphones, the phones that protect your privacy the best, or that give you the most options to protect your privacy, are by far the most expensive ones. They're really cheap Android phones that are popular, in all kinds of low-income communities around the world. Are not only do they not get software updates, which is bad, but they also come preloaded with a lot of malware, of stalkerware, of all kinds of stuff like that. So it's much bigger than just MoviePass, though that's, of course, a really great example of it. And I think the point there is not to try to convince the low-income people who can't afford anything else to behave differently, because they have immediate needs that they need to meet, but to work on elite public opinion, the people who have the power to get across to legislators and regulators and people with power-making abilities inside companies to rethink that and to work against it. But ultimately, I think that, politics we're not going to get there without politics, and we're not going to get there without legislation and regulation of some kind. So I think this is it, but happy to talk afterward, especially after my pupils adjust to normal light again. Thanks, guys.